Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of ELI on Air, the ELI Talks interactive broadcast where we speak with interesting folks from across the Jewish spectrum about ideas of Jewish religious engagement, Jewish literacy, and Jewish identity. My name is Miriam Brosseau, and I am the program director of ELI Talks, and I am especially thrilled to be here today with mentors and colleagues and friends of mine, Allison and Sara Shapiro-Plevan, who will introduce themselves momentarily. But Allison gave a wonderful ELI talk all about matterness and this idea of making people feel like they matter. And this is a perfectly appropriate time of the year to be speaking about exactly this when it comes to our Jewish communities and Jewish organizations. And as we're having this conversation, we encourage you to join along. Feel free to ask questions in the comments of the video here. And you can also share your comments and questions via Twitter using hashtag ELI Talks, that's ELI Talks, and we'll keep an eye on that and ask your questions on the air as we're going through this conversation. But with that, I think we'll jump right in. And I'd like to start, actually, Allison, could you take a moment to just introduce a little bit about yourself and give us a synopsis of the ELI talk that you gave?
Absolutely. Miriam, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everything that you and C3 and Avichai have been doing to get new and big ideas out there. It's fantastic. I have been writing about the impact of social media and shared social networks on people and organizations for about 10 years now. And the first couple of books, there was Momentum and then The Network Nonprofit with Beth Cantor. And those books focused on the how. How do we use these tools? What buttons do you push? How do you connect people to one another? How do you weave these networks? And then over the last couple of years, and really largely, Miriam, as you know, catalyzed by my experience as president of Temple Beth Abraham in Tarrytown, New York, I've really been thinking about the why a lot more. And that's where this book came from, Matterness, Fearless Leadership in a Social World, is about why is it so important to make other people known and heard and empowered, because that's my definition of matterness, meaning making those other people more important than they have been in an organizational context. And it's because every day when we're walking through life, regardless of what the context is, it could be at Starbucks, it could be at Temple, it could be at school. Every time we're interacting with organizations, the chances are that many of us find it a diminishing experience. And in my role as Temple president, I had people yelling every day when I first started. My parking spot was taken and the doors were locked and all of the things that make leadership so loud and cacophonous. But beneath it all, particularly if you can take a step back from the anger that often happens in those interactions, beneath it all was, I really want to matter here, and you, the institution, aren't letting me. You're not taking the time to get to know me as a person, to know my name, to know my story, to give me a chance to tell my story. And most importantly of all, Miriam, you're not giving me a chance to be a co-owner with you of whatever this endeavor is. And with social media, we have the opportunity to create this integrated space online and on land where people everywhere can contribute wonderful things. And so my talk was about how to go about doing that. And it's had three main points to it. One was to focus on principles over process. We lose principles in all the busyness of everyday life. Particularly now, as we're moving into the holidays, our Jewish organizations are frantically busy, and in that busyness, we tend to push people away. We create a distance with them. The second issue is leading through conversation, and Sara Shapiro-Plevan, who I think is the best practitioner of this that I know, leads JedLab every day through conversation. Instead of broadcasting messages, we need to be engaging in conversations with people to elicit their wisdom and their thoughts and their feelings. And then the final piece is learning how to lead crowds. We think about leadership in just a hierarchical org chart sort of way. But when people are coming and going as quickly as they are now, when they have so many choices of where and how to participate, we need to switch our lens to thinking about gathering up people to get something done. And that's a different style of leadership. So that's the essence of my ELI talk.
Excellent. So much to dig into here, but I'd like to turn it over to Sara for just a moment, who gets a shout out in the talk, appropriately so, and just hear a little bit of your first reactions. What struck you about this idea, about this conversation, and how does it play out in your life and work? Brief.
Thank you so much. So I felt like I was nodding the entire time I was listening to Allison speak. And I think most of that really comes from the fact that it resonated so much with personal experiences that I've had and that I continue to have. I think it's only fair to say that in addition to my work in the Jewish community, I am the child of Jewish communal professionals and the spouse of a Jewish communal professional. Mm-hmm. And I have this sort of Jewish communal experience that is a part of my family. So I experience this kind of relationship with the Jewish community in its entirety. And every single story that Allison told felt deeply personal. And what immediately resonated for me was the feeling of feeling small, like feeling insignificant and feeling as though my individual story or each person's individual story didn't matter. The story you told about the person who was in the hospital with a broken leg, who didn't tell anybody but still felt that they needed a phone call from the rabbi, which, by the way, it made us all laugh. And for anyone who has ever worked in the Jewish community, we were all, of course, nodding along. Those stories from the professional side and from the personal side are all stories that deeply resonate for us. There are those of us who have felt small as members of communities, and those of us who, frankly, as professionals, feel small and understand that we accidentally, and sometimes even deliberately, make others feel small. But one piece that I'd really like to highlight, and I want to appreciate and really raise up, is the piece that Allison discusses really in the second half. The piece about taking initiative and not asking permission. This is something that I think is perhaps a real challenge for most people, mostly because we need to give ourselves permission, and we often feel as though we have to ask. I have been taught by many colleagues, friends of yours, especially Rabbi Arnie Sandlin, that you don't ask permission. You just go ahead and do. And that is something that has not come naturally to me. And I have really had to learn how to do this. And I think that it's something that has been very powerful in learning how to help other people matter. That sometimes you really can't sit around and wait for other people to give you permission to shake hands with someone and introduce yourself at Kiddush and smile at them and make them feel welcome. And you can't always ask permission to do something else for someone. To, bring a lasagna to someone who has recently lost a relative and it's a month later and they're feeling lonely. You don't have to ask permission. Sometimes you just do. And I think that is part of what's so challenging. That's not natural for us. We want to ask permission because we understand that there's social boundaries. And sometimes it's better to make a mistake and apologize than to fail to ask permission and leave people feeling as though they don't know. So Allison, thank you so much for raising that up. That felt really important to remind people that initiative does make a difference. Even something very, very insignificant, but something that feels insignificant.
Beautiful, thanks. I also I want to also think about as we are approaching the high holidays, and this is, I'm sure, what's on most of our minds as we're, readying ourselves for Shabbat and then Rosh Hashanah and then all of these crazy things that happen in the next couple of weeks. It really is, it's a time of reflection and a time of tshuva, returning, of going back to what we've done and rethinking our choices. And what does organizational tshuva look like? How does that actually play out? If organizations really took this, especially Jewish organizations who are in this mindset anyway, really took this time to reflect on some of the choices that they've made and the way they interact with the individuals in their community, and decide to make that shift and reset and think about matterness moving forward.
So I want to build on what Sara was saying, and she said it so beautifully. And Arnie Samlin is also a teacher and friend of mine, Sara, so I'm delighted that you recognized him. People have opportunities now to take initiative, particularly online. We need organizations with cultures that encourage this, right? So we're not trying to break through to organizations, but organizations are giving us an opportunity to be our best selves. And that's what we want to do. For reflections, I would love for organizations, Miriam, to get past the busyness, past the programs. We have to stop talking about programs. I'm just going to throw out a number there. We have 3 times too many programs in Jewish organizations than we need. I'm just making it up, but it's something like that. And we have to get to the essence of who we are in relationship to our people. Are we the place that says yes before we say no? Are we the place that defaults to let's experiment and no one's going to get in trouble with it? Or is our default finger pointing? Are we the place that really wants to know people's stories or just wants to rush past that to get to the checkbook? I really think that organizations need to have the leadership and the courage to ask themselves those very hard questions about how exactly they are organized. Otherwise, they can't get to matterness. There's so much stuff in the way. And I would just start it very, very simply. We did this at my synagogue. We ran through a scenario of what would happen if a congregant came with an idea that was out of the box. Would our first reaction be yes, or would it be no? And we had to work for a long time to make sure that the first reaction was yes, and work through what all the problems were before that had made our first reaction no.
That totally brings to mind a phrase that was shared with me quite a while ago that's always sort of rumbled around inside my mind, and that I have trouble seeing in so many of our Jewish spaces. And I think we aspire to this, but we're not getting there. People over protocol. We want so badly to put people over protocol, but we're process people. I'm a process person. I love rules, and I love the way that you can watch something and anything evolve when looking closely at the process. But we have to be able to put people over protocol. I want to just share a really quick story. I missed a meeting last night at 7 o'clock. That was held on the second night of school for my son. It was a meeting at my shul that was about whether or not kids were able to use microphones for bar bat mitzvah. It's kind of an impromptu thing, but it required a quorum, and it was put together relatively rapidly, and a decision was sort of needing to be made relatively quickly, or at least a sense from the community about how to move forward was needed. The week before Rosh Hashanah, second day of school, I wasn't brave enough to speak up about the reasons why I wasn't able to participate. And I was really grateful that someone else was. this was about a process, right? This was about needing a certain number of people to pass a certain, I think, amendment to a bylaw. It really is about how community is constructed. But it was impossible to see the members of the community who were being affected by this process and think about how to make it possible for them to participate and share their stories. So as it happened, the decision that was made ultimately was a decision that was made by people over the age of 65 about the lives and concerns of 13-year-olds and their parents. And this was about process and not about people. I'm sure it's all going to work out just fine, but there are moments like this in every one of our communities where we are indelibly tied to our bylaws. Yeah. And indelibly tied to putting the heat on in our buildings and what it takes to do that. And all of the various legal processes that help to keep us as 501c3s, et cetera. And sometimes that really obscures the people that we serve and the people who we're there to be with every Wednesday or Monday morning or Shabbat or whatever.
Yeah. I think that's just right, Sara. And when process is getting in the way, when we spend an enormous amount of time in meetings talking about what could go wrong, right? That is our people becoming terrified because of the rules. And we have to move from the conversation about what could go wrong to how good this will feel when we do something, right? How are we making people feel? We don't have that conversation. We don't measure that at all. We measure process. We don't measure matterness yet. Hopefully we will soon.
It reminds me of that quote that is attributed to Maya Angelou, but about how people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Exactly.
And I love that, and I really agree that Jewish organizations can do more of this, and we can do it better. I'm curious to hear more about where you see the role of technology here, because I think the great irony of all of this is that most of us look at a lot of folks in the Jewish organizational world especially look at technology and get very scared of it because because it is overwhelming and because it is new and all of these other reasons. But there's a sort of defensive wall, a fortress, if you will, put up around themselves between the organization and these tools, and then all of these excuses made that technology, social media in particular, is actually distancing us from one another. When from this conversation so far, and from a lot of what I've learned from both of you, it's a lot of these other sort of cultural pieces that are more at fault for creating the gaps within our community. So I'd just love to hear more from one or both of you about the role of technology in all of this and that mindset shift around it.
I actually think that we have to think about the ways in which we use technology, and especially social media, to draw people together and to keep people apart, and not to lump social media and technology necessarily together, or even various kinds of social media and technology into one gigantic category. Of course, the ability to communicate with people on a regular basis is a beautiful thing. It doesn't require the endless process, right, that it takes, or that it took many years ago to get information to people. The expense is different, the speed, obviously the ability to share little nuggets of information versus big chunks of information. But I think what's really powerful is when both technology and social media are used to cultivate relationships. I actually have found that a lot of the sharing of personal stuff in a public way using technology and social media has really made a tremendous difference in helping people to feel connected, to feel like we matter. So, for example, I think JedLab is an interesting example here. We have done, over the course of a couple of years, inviting people to share in the lead up to holidays how that preparation makes them feel. This past year for Pesach, we had, in the 2 weeks before Pesach, we had people contributing every day about their spiritual preparation before Pesach. Not about what they were teaching, not about lesson planning, and not about organizing, but about their own spiritual endeavor. We're doing it again this year in correspondence with the various markers that Rabbi Alan Liu, Zichrono Livracha, created in his book, This Is Real and You Are Unprepared. I'm giving you a away. And having people share what's personal helps to bring people together, even if it's not about a personal interaction, right? You can still be a lurker and read something that's deeply personal. Having congregations share little nuggets of content written by congregants, not necessarily by the rabbi, but share some of that thoughtfulness and that deeply personal part of an individual's story, I think helps to build relationships between people. I also think that we need to be very careful in understanding how we use the resources at our disposal. The old-style synagogue bulletin was deadly. New synagogue bulletins in constant contact can also be deadly, even when they're sent out via email, right? When the font is too small and there are a million pictures that take a lot of time to upload, and you still have to shuffle through it to get the information that you need, it's not necessarily easier. So I think what we want to do is think about how we're using technology and how we're using social media to build those relationships and how our users are actually experiencing them.
I think that was beautifully said, Sara. I think I always want to caution people to be very careful about not being dichotomous about technology. It's not all good and it's not all bad. It's somewhere in the middle. When used well, when used constructively and in a loving way, it is a phenomenal way to augment human relationships. It doesn't replace what happens on land. It is a companion to it. The thing that it does is that it makes us known and makes things scalable. And both of those things can be terrifying to a certain kind of leader, or they could be very empowering for people like me, who would much prefer to sit in my house and connect with people and stay in touch with people and celebrate them. What it requires, though, it requires a different kind of leadership. It requires a facilitative style of leadership, which, Sara, you are phenomenal at doing, at asking good questions, not broadcasting, at connecting people to one another in a space, at acknowledging their contributions to that space, and at finding ways to co-create, to create something together. When those things happen, like it does on JedLab, it is truly a magical experience for people. The issue for a lot of leaders, somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, Miriam, you know, I'm of a certain age, can I learn how to do this? And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of a certain age too. I don't think that that rules you out. We didn't say exactly what age, but of a certain age. But here's the key. The thing that makes it different is the key is to begin by unlearning things. And that's the hard part. It means putting aside the 20, 30 years of lessons that people had, particularly in organizational settings, when you were supposed to have talking points, you were always supposed to have the answer in public, you were supposed to, you know, be the smartest guy in the room, everything was supposed to be controlled, and that's how you were judged. And now we're asking people to move to a different kind of environment where being vulnerable is celebrated. And that's hard. And I appreciate that it's hard. What we need people to do is to find small spaces where they can experiment and start to feel comfortable. And we need, collectively, people like the three of us need to keep sharing the stories of where technology is transcending barriers for people and enabling them to connect and learn and grow and love together.
Mm-hmm. Allison, I so appreciate that you have shared that angle on this, because I really do think that there is a piece to all of this that reminds me that I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
In a lot of very serious ways. Even a Google Hangout on there makes me nervous.
Yeah.
And I think that the ability to create an intimate space where I can get to know other people online,
yeah,
where I can hang out with a couple of people like you guys, right, in this space that feels safe, and an opportunity for me to be vulnerable with you and share new ideas and explore new things with you feels radical. We're not in the same place. And that feels like something I would not have been able to explore years and years ago, but also without the support of technology. And I really also want to highlight what you said about augmenting relationships, not replacing them, and not necessarily creating brand new relationships. I really do think that there is such beauty in the fact that technology and social media allow us to build on relationships that have evolved, but not necessarily to create brand new relationships from scratch, although that does happen. I want to highlight, just because it became such a great reminder to me from something that you just said, Allison. In your talk, you used the phrase, leadership is a function of what you do, not where you sit.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm sitting here in a chair,
mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of the fact that doing is something that social media really allows us to be part of. We can act. We're not experiencing the kind of stasis that we necessarily might experience alone in offices where we are remote from other people. We can connect with other people, and we can do together in ways that our physical isolation might not have previously allowed us to do.
Lovely.
So, Allison, the subtitle of your talk was about aligning Jewish organizations with Jewish values, and
yes.
I'm curious, like, how do both of you see this idea of matterness as being Jewish? What's so Jewish about matterness?
Well, it's not solely Jewish, but it does speak to a core set of Jewish practices and values that are at the core of who we are as people. And the place to start, Miriam, if we're talking about synagogues, the place to start is the ubiquitous phrase of warm and welcoming.
Mm.
Big Tent. Judaism did an experiment up in Westchester, I think a year and a half ago, of sent somebody out to be a prospective member to about 15 synagogues, to called and emailed and got no response from the overwhelming majority of synagogues. And if you go to their websites, I can guarantee you there is some version of "we are warm and welcoming" on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens between the text and the principle to the practice, where we lose the essence of what it means to us to be a community of people, to be a loving, warm, welcoming community of people. And it's all that stuff we were talking about earlier. It's all the busyness, it's the fear of losing control, the budget, which overwhelms everybody in synagogue life right now, and most Jewish institutions, in fact. And it's these things that get in the way And you know, the values that we're all trying to aim towards, these principles, these tenets of who we are, that we do want to be loving and inclusive, and to take some of the loneliness and stress out of life. The way to get back to it is to refocus on outside instead of inside. To me, that's the fundamental goal of focusing on matterness, is to get ourselves out of our everyday work that we've become entrenched in, and to refocus on the things that matter, as Sara has said, which are the people out there. But it's not just refocusing on them like we're counting them. It is refocusing them as whole, smart, giving, loving, generous people, and allowing them to be that way within our institution, because they want to be. Our synagogue, Miriam, last January voted to do away with dues and move to a voluntary donation system. People called it my fakakta idea when I first started to talk about it a couple of years ago. So, are you still talking about that fakakta thing? Yes, I am. We voted overwhelmingly in January to start this new system, giving people guidelines, which is the leadership piece. The guideline is we need people, we need a certain number of families to contribute at this amount in order to sustain ourselves. You know, there's a reality to this. We have already exceeded our revenue for this year on that line of the budget. We've never done since in the 10 years I've been involved in synagogue life, and almost everybody stayed where they were or came in above it. And as somebody said to me, it just feels so much better to write the check. A check that makes me feel generous instead of a check that makes me feel guilty. And that's getting the alignment back in order.
Mm-hmm. I actually, this may be sort of contradictory to your point, Allison, but I think it's complementary. I'm thinking back to like the earliest narratives of Genesis, right? We counted people,
right?
I agree with you entirely that is not what we want to do. But we named them. Every person had a name, and every person was connected to somebody else. And we knew who that person's parents were, and we knew who that person's siblings were. We knew where they were from and how they were connected to the bigger picture and our bigger story. And no, I'm not looking for numbers or tushies and chairs. We all agree that is not the way that we want to do our business.
Yeah.
But I would like to be able to think of those original narratives and the way that we understood the way that people were connected.
Yes.
The deep part of the way that we understand relationships in the Jewish community today, and the way that we understand who really matters. Because everybody matters.
Yes.
It doesn't matter at what level you give. It doesn't matter at what level you're engaged with the communal conversation. It doesn't matter if you show up once a year or you don't show up at all. It doesn't matter whether you consider yourself a part of the community or not. Everybody matters. And I think that we need to find healthier ways to message that out. And what we need is to figure out how we can elicit those stories and how we can make sure that every person knows that their name is known and that their story is known to at least one somebody.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. It reminds me of the other ELI talk, Miriam, that Alana Kaufman gave, saying that Jews of color are not even counted, much less asked to share their story. It is an incredibly powerful tool to make sure that people are not just counted but known. That's the difference, right? You don't have a number, you have a name for a reason. And we need organizational leaders to understand that it's not soft and it's not an extra. It's an essential part of our institutional being to focus our energies on making people known. And That is so powerful, and people can forgive all sorts of things. They can forgive, not having their parking spot right there, and they can forgive, the badly worded newsletter. They cannot forgive not being known, and that's where we need to begin, not to end.
So, on the angle of communicating and also playing off of an article that's being discussed right now in JedLab, for those of you watching live, there was an article in Fast Company, I believe, that was talking about these two women who are on a mission to rebrand Judaism in a funkier, sort of more youthful, more appealing, hip kind of way. And it reminded me a little bit, Allison, of the point in your talk where you say that matterness isn't just a new way of doing customer service. So how do you know? How do you know when there's a there, when there's a, if it is about finding those stories and communicating them, how can you tell if a community has really integrated this idea of matterness, that it really lives at the core of their being, versus they've just gone through kind of a surfacey rebranding, remarketing campaign and put a new face on an old thing?
So you can actually see and feel this every day when it is in gear. And this is one of the great attributes of social media, right? That you can actually see it, point to it, take a screenshot of it, bring it to the board table. I did this the other night when a new member, thanked us publicly for having this flexible donation system and said, I am so happy not to feel, she and her husband recently lost their jobs, and she said, I am so happy not to feel like a schnorrer here. Think of how powerful that is, right? So you're going to see it and feel it every day. What you do need to do is to designate somebody, or somebody's, doesn't have to just be one person, to continually point it out. This is what Sara does on JedLab, right? She says, look at that example right there of that really good stuff happening. That's what needs to happen at the board table or within the institution on a continuing basis. And you will begin to feel less alone as an institution, which is really critically important. Part of what makes leadership feel so exhausting for people is that they are working largely alone. They are doing all of the office stuff themselves. They don't really trust volunteers to do anything meaningful. They are advertising, trying to pull people out for events. And that will begin to shift. You will begin to get ideas of events from people. They will begin to take more of a leadership role in organizing activities. Ideas will germinate where they never did before. And things will start to change. But it's awfully important, Miriam, for somebody to be designated as the story catcher. I just made that up. As the story catcher, to be able to share on a regular basis of what's happening and why it's shifting and why it feels so good.
So I just want to add a couple of pieces to that because it was brilliant, and thank you. I think
you're a story catcher, Sara. I like that.
You know what? I don't see myself as that, and I appreciate your angle on that. So thank you. I think the key is not to have one story catcher. It's to energize a community and accept as many stories as you can harvest. And then from that harvest, select the stories that are most powerful. Because I think that what you'll find is new stories that actually highlight what it is that has changed. What I find so challenging about this idea of rebranding is that often rebranding is like when it is a cover for nothing has changed. It's a fence, right? It's some kind of barrier that's drawn. And I, of course, have been thinking about this since the conversation is unfolding before us. It's a cover, right? We're putting a new cover on. We're still hiding behind the we that we have always been.
Right.
And we're embarrassed by that. So we're putting on this beautiful front that tell you the story of who we are, but behind that, there's a shame. about what we haven't yet changed. And frankly, and I kind of don't know how this happened, but I want to invite everybody to poke holes in that fence, right? Or to release the stories that are in there, because the stories that are powerful will obscure, not erase, but in many ways outshine the stories that are not powerful, right? The harder stories. And will show that things are changing.
Yeah.
Will show that rebrands are successful. And I think the real key is to shift the tide and not have that be the responsibility of the paid professionals, but really empower the community to begin to harvest those stories. That is super hard, and again, that is about empowering people to take initiative and to share those stories, which is again a question of how we share with our readers that we want everybody to be included in that process.
Well, and what you touch on, Sara, that's so incredibly important is the need to have uncomfortable conversations in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
And this, frankly, is a place where organizations like Federation could have an enormous impact. When you and I are using the word story, we're including the, I went to someplace and something happened, but we're also including the, this is how I felt when something happened. And sometimes those are going to be uncomfortable criticisms, and that is a gift to an organization. It is the thing that terrifies organizations and traditional leaders the most. Someone's going to criticize us in public. I think it's a gift because if you are willing to engage in that uncomfortable conversation, it is an amazing demonstration to your people that you are willing to listen, that you are willing to acknowledge difficulties, or you're going to explain what somebody isn't getting. There is nothing better for relationship building than going through an uncomfortable conversation with somebody, and it needs to be done regularly. And our groups are terrible at it. Somehow, somewhere in the water, a century ago, somebody may put out a secret memo that Jewish institutions couldn't be criticized in public, and it is really hamstringing us because particularly younger people want to have those conversations, and we need to have them.
And I think it's actually less, or perhaps it's less, about criticism than it is about sharing stories, right? Talking about how we feel when we interact with organizations and talking about our points of vulnerability, because it's both about how we feel vulnerable and how organizations are vulnerable. It's not that we are feeling perfect and whole ourselves.
I'm going to just push back just a little tiny bit, Sara, and say there are times when organizations need to hear from their own people that you suck. And the response has to be,
don't worry, I totally agree with you.
Tell me how I suck.
I agree with you.
Good thing.
Well, I was going to ask a question about what's the responsibility of followers in all of this. We've talked a lot about leadership and the responsibilities of leadership, but I think we've got a good closing message there for any other final thoughts to share with our viewers on this idea of matterness and what Jewish organizations can do to make 5776 the year of more matterness than ever?
I think I love the phrase that Sara brought up, which I'm just trying to think of just how to try to do this in a self-effacing way, and it's not working. So I'll just say I love the phrase of it's about what you do, not where you sit, which is really an invitation for everybody to participate in building more transparent, more vulnerable, more loving organizations for them to participate in. We all need to own these places. And if I could just encourage leaders to do one thing this year, Miriam. It's to think about, if this is true, to think about why the default is no instead of yes so often. Just start there, and to start to work your way through unpacking the things that are making you uncomfortable, that are making you scared, and the enormous opportunity costs for your organization of saying no so often. That's where I would start.
And since they were your words, I will certainly carry them into the new year as well, Allison. And I really, instead of just thinking about, it's not just what were your exact words? I actually wrote them down. Leadership is a function of what you do, not where you sit. To think about the physical action that's involved in that, right? For Jewish organizations, and for each one of us as a part of community, however we define that, to think about acting. And that acting can be our actions with one person, with our spouses and our children and our friends, but it can be on a communal level as well, to act, to do something that matters.
Yep. Whatever
it is. That can be something tiny that has incredible, incredible effects. And I really, as a person who it is very sedentary, I think so much about the physical action that's involved in that beautiful quotation. We have to do. We can't just sit. We have to get up and we have to be present for people, and we have to think about how we make them matter.
Amen.
Awesome. Amen. I think we've got some really rich, meaty things to think about in this new year, and lots of opportunities to do exactly that with the holidays upon us, and so many folks joining in the Jewish chorus like never before. Then this is the time to start playing out some of those experiments and start showing a little vulnerability. And I hope that we do, and take this message with us into 5776. So thank you both. Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Sara, both of you for being here as part of this conversation. And I certainly learn from you, both of you, all of the time. Thank you to everyone who's watching live and who's watching this recording. We appreciate you being part of our community, and wish you a wonderful and sweet and happy and healthy and joyful new year. And we will see you next time. There are more conversations to come, more matterness to be established, and we're thrilled to have you with us on this journey. So thank you all so much, and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody.